Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Becca, and in today's video we're going to do block number 7 for the Sew Becca Sampler. Now the Sew Becca Sampler is a sampler quilt that we're doing while we're all stuck inside for the coronavirus quarantine. This quilt is going to feature 12 blocks that are going to finish out at 12 inches, and then after we put in some borders and sashing, it's going to make a nice size throw quilt. Block number 7 is called the Constellation block, and it looks like this. It's a pretty block that features kind of a star in the middle with these little accent pops out in the corners. I love how this block turned out. You can see for my colorways, I chose a blue and green for the star, and then for these accent colors in the corners, I just chose a darker blue fabric, and it's all on my white background. I'm really excited about using that white background because I think what that's going to do is give me kind of a white quilt with pops of color. I can't wait to see how all of this looks. All right, without any further ado, let's just jump right into this block because this video is going to be a little bit longer than some of the other ones.
All right, I decided to wing the pattern and give you my own cutting instructions. So I've recorded this like 5 times, but I promise this is the right pattern. Okay, so this is what we're gonna do this time around. We're gonna do a block called Constellation. And basically what it is a really pretty star with some accents in the 4 corners. Let me bring you in nice and close and show you what we're looking at. Okay, so when you're looking at this block, you can see it's made up of only half square triangles. There are 16 1, 2, 3, 4 times 1, 2, 3, 4 half square triangles to make up this 12-inch block. Each of these half square triangles will need to measure at 3.5 inches in order for this to work. And we have 4 different sets of half square triangles. We're going to need 4 of each one. Set A is going to be these units down in the corners. You have a background and then this different color. This color is not in the actual star. It's a different contrasting color. It can be really different or just a little different. It's up to you. Or if you wanted it to, it could just be an extension of that darker color. It's up to you. Unit B is going to be a background with your darker of your 2 colors. Unit C is going to be a background with your lighter of your 2 colors. And then Unit D is going to be your darker and your lighter color combined. Now for me, I am going to use this green and this blue to be my star. And then my pop of color is going to be this dark blue out in the corners. So for cutting, you could definitely cut a bunch of squares and then cut them on the diagonal and follow the instructions that are listed in the table, but I'm going to go back to what I know. We're going to make half square triangle units the way I know how to make them. So I've done a lot of squares. I have measured all of my squares at 4.5 inches. I know that that is going to yield a half square triangle unit that's probably closer to somewhere between 3.25 or 4 inches. And then I'm going to have to size it down. I would rather my half square triangle units be bigger and size them down than to cut my fabric too small and have units that aren't exactly what I need them to be. So I'm erring on the side of caution here. You don't have to cut them at this size. You could cut your squares probably at 3 7/8 or 4 inches and probably get right on the money. But for me, I like to cut them bigger and size them down. So I've got a whole bunch of squares cut at 4.5 inches. All right, so disclaimer, I've already cut all my fabric. So while I'm talking to you, you could do some cutting. Let me tell you what you're going to cut first. So to make this work, we're going to cut 4 different types of fabric. You're going to have a darker color for your corners. You're going to have 2 contrasting fabrics for your stars, and then you're going to have your background. From your background, this is going to be a lot of squares. You're going to cut 6 squares at 4.5 inches. From your star fabrics, these are your main 2 fabrics. You're going to cut 4 squares at 4.5 inches. And from the squares that you're going to use in the corners, you're going to cut 2 squares at 4.5 inches. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to take the lighter of the fabric from our star and our background, and we're going to draw a line corner to corner on all of those fabrics. Okay?
Now, here's where things get a little funky. When you're marking your fabric, I just want to show this to you. A lot of folks will tend to use friction pens, and they like these because when they mark their fabric and they press it or apply a hot iron to the fabric, the mark goes away. And that's great, but the mark doesn't actually fully ever go away. The chemicals are still there. So if the fabric gets cold enough, this mark can come back. This is not a true sewing notion, but a lot of sewers and a lot of quilters tend to go for this as a marking tool. Now, if you're going to mark your fabric in the seam allowance, or it's just going to be cut away anyway, no harm, no foul, you're okay to use it. But if you're going to use this to mark the right side of your fabric, or you're marking on the back side of a very light piece of fabric, I would think twice before using this. For me personally, I like to use water-soluble markers. You can get these on Amazon very easily. They're usually about $4 for one, and they last me for months and months and months before it dries up. That's what I've used to mark my fabric here. The water-soluble marker puts a nice mark on the fabric, and then once water or anything liquid comes in contact with it, this mark disappears. So when I steam press this, when I spritz it with Mary Ellen's, when I use flatter spray, or when I just put it in the wash, this mark is gonna come off, and I have never had any of these marks come back. So this is really good to use for both the wrong side and the right side of your fabric. Okay, so I'm at my machine, and basically we're just going to pair up all of our fabrics. I know each one of my colors is going to need to be paired with a background, and I'm going to need 4 half square triangles for each of my colors with a background, which is why we had to cut so many of our background squares. So I'm just going to take my time to pair up 2 of each of the colors of my star with a background, and then those 2 corner units will be paired with a background as well. So I've got all of those paired up. I'm going to set them aside, and now what I have left are 2 of each of the colors of my star, and I'm just going to pair each of those up. So now all of my fabric is literally in sets. I'm going to set them aside, and I'm just going to chain sew. This means I'm going to start sewing, and I'm not going to cut my thread. I'm just going to move on to the next batch. What I'm going to do is sew with the fabric right sides together, and the piece that's up is the piece that has the line going straight down the middle. I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch on this side of the line, get through my entire stack, and then I'm going to go back through and sew 1/4 of an inch on this side of the line. And then we'll cut them apart and trim them up. Now the nice thing about this is because I cut my squares so generously, I don't have to worry about all of the corners matching up exactly because I know I'm going to end up trimming these down. Now, you may find when you get to sewing your background and your lighter colored squares that both of them have a line down the middle. That's completely okay. It doesn't matter which one you sew with on top, as long as you can see the line. Realistically, you only needed to mark corner to corner on 2 of your light colors, not all 4 of them. But sometimes it's easier just to have you mark a couple extra so that you don't have to organize and set aside the ones that were marked and were not marked. You'll find sewing these feels like it goes so fast. At least I find that way. And then one more, and then we'll flip it around and go down the other line. All right, now I'm going to pull it all back. I'm going to leave them together. And I'm going to start at this end this time. And I'm going to measure a 1/4 inch away from that line and sew down the other side. I am actually starting on the last one that came out. Literally flipping it around. I'm going to sew off. You just want to be careful when you're doing this that you don't accidentally sew one set onto the next set. Sew off and then put your next one in. Just make sure your needle is not going through 2 sets of fabrics. I like to kind of pivot it over here, sew off, and then pull in the next one I'm going to sew onto once the needle comes completely off of the previous block. All right, now we're going to take a little pair of snips and we're literally just going to cut the threads that are holding all of these together. All right, now I'm going to take a second to just touch each of these with an iron so that I relax those fibers from where I stitched.
Okay, this is where things start to get fun, at least for me. It does not matter what type of ruler or template you use for this. I've got a Dresden template, like literally just sitting within arm's reach. You could use a pair of scissors if you want to. I just like cutting with my rotary cutter. All you're going to do is line up a template right in between those 2 lines that you stitched, preferably on or near that line that you drew, and just cut right down the middle and set them aside. You're going to do that for every set of squares that you sewed. Okay, we've got all of these. Now, what we're going to do is open all of these up. And we're going to finger press first, and then we'll press them with a dry iron. I'm just going to very gently finger press these to one side. Now they do have different templates that you can use to actually square up your half square triangle in this form. If you have one of those, please feel free to do it. But I want to teach you guys how to do this without those extra templates, because you're probably sewing with only the materials that you have at home. So this is the old school way of doing it. You have your little half square triangle unit laid here. You're going to put your finger in between the two layers, all the way back to where those two fabrics meet, and then just press down with your fingertips along that seam. Do not pull, do not push it in any direction, because that will warp your fabric and it'll cause your nice straight diagonal line to get a little wonky. Now for the ones where you have background on one side, you want to press away from the background, but for any of the others, just press to whichever one looks darker. Now, I guess if your background was black and it was darker than your colors, you could finger press it that way. These diagonal seams are not going to nest in any way, so you don't really have to worry too much about some going up, some going down. You just need to finger press them so that they're all open. Once we have all of these finger pressed, we're going to take each of them to a dry iron, and we're just going to lay the iron right on top of that for just a few seconds, and that's going to cause this block to lay really nice and flat, and then we will be able to trim these up, and the last step will just be sewing it together into our 16 patch. It's called a 16 patch because they're basically 16 blocks that are going to go together to make a bigger block. Almost done. All right, let me go press these with a hot iron. Now we are ready to trim these up. So we're going to do this for every half square triangle that we sewed together. We're going to get our unit. We're going to get a ruler, preferably a square one, and we're going to lay it on top of our block. We need these to all measure 3.5 inches when they're done. So the first and most important thing that we're going to look for is this 45-degree line. We want that to lay directly on top of the seam where the two fabrics meet. Then we're going to take our ruler and make sure we have fabric extending over to the right, off to the top, and then past the 3.5 inch line on both parts of our ruler. We're going to take our rotary cutter, clean up the right, clean up the top, get rid of that extra, and now we've created a perfect 90-degree point right up here. We'll lift up our ruler and turn this around so that the corner that was up here is now down here. And then we're going to reposition our ruler in the exact same position that we had it before. The line for 45 degrees runs right on top of your seam, and the 3.5 inch line here and here is on the cut edge of the fabric that we just cleaned up. And just so you guys know, the 45-degree line is usually marked somewhere. They'll tell you that it's 45 degrees. On a square ruler, it's obviously the one that's running from the top right corner to the bottom left corner, or maybe a different way depending on how you have it. But there are a lot of different marking systems on a lot of different rulers, so you just got to use the one that works for your brain. That 45-degree line really helps make sure that when you're done trimming your block up, the two fabrics come together in a perfect point here and here instead of off to the side. So we're going to do that for every half square triangle unit we made. Now that I have all of my half square triangles trimmed up, I've also got them categorized into each of their 4 units. So unit A, B, C, and D, right? The next part is where things get really fun and actually a little bit easy. We're going to make 4 of the same block, and then we're going to sew those 4 blocks in to make the bigger Constellation block. Each quadrant of this goes together the exact same way. It's just you turn them slightly different. So what we're going to do is lay all of our units with that darker pop of color that's going to go in the corner and the upper left, and it's going to be orientated so that the color is pointing down to our left. Then we're going to take the background and the light color from our star. And this is very important. You want to make sure that your entire stack is all oriented the same way. So all of my half square triangles are laying the same way. We're going to take those and we're going to lay it so that the color is also pointing down into the left. So in the corner, we have all of these pointing down to the left, and we have the color pointing down to the left. Then in this position, we're going to take the background and our darker color for our star. And again, we're going to want to make sure that all 4 of our squares, I've got a little dog here, I just want to cut off. All 4 of our squares are orientated in the same way, and we're going to lay it so that the color points up and to the right. And then the last one is going to be the one where our dark and light colors combine, and we just want to make sure that our squares are all orientated the same way. And we're going to lay this so that the green points up to the right and the blue points down to the left. So what it should be creating is kind of like this stripe and then a little bit of a stripe here with a pop here. Do you guys see how that looks? It's facing me, not facing you, but it should work the same way. Let me turn it around so that you can see it your way. That is what your quadrants should look like. All 4 of them should kind of look like this. It looks almost like a little bit of an arrow. I am going to daisy chain my units again because I feel like it'll keep everything nice and neat and together. So I'm going to pull 2 of these and sew, and then the bottom 2 and sew. So I just want to keep all of my squares close by. So I'm going to pull the one off the top. This is the one that's going to go in the corner, and then the one immediately next to it. I'm going to lay them right sides up on my little sewing tray so that I can make sure they look visually the right way. Then I pick up the one on the right and just lay it over on top of the one on the left. And now I know that seam right here is where I'm going to sew. That's what I'm going to stitch on. And it's already laying there with that seam in the right position for me. I'm just going to move these a little bit out of the way. I'm going to sew that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then next, I'm going to grab the blue and then the blue-green and make sure that they're oriented in the right way. Pick up the right, lay it over on top of the left, and sew that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to cut my thread here. And I'm just going to take time to press these towards opposite ways. It doesn't matter which one goes right, which one goes left. You just want to press them opposite. So the top one I'm pressing to the right, and the bottom one I'm pressing it over to the left. And then I'm going to lay them on top of one another. Those seams in the middle should nest very nicely. Line up my raw edges and sew with a 1/4 inch. paying very close attention to that spot where the two fabrics meet in the middle and where the threads intersect. I want to go through the X, not above it or below it. I'm going to go slowly so I can help steer the needle away if I need to. And then right off of the fabric. And this is one of my 4 quadrants. Now on the back where all 4 of those fabrics come in, this is actually going to be a pretty bulky seam. So I think if you wanted to, you could press this seam open. I did not. I just pressed it to one side and I feel like it'll be fine. It's just going to be really bulky right here where all 4 of those fabrics meet because you're dealing with half square triangle units. But this is what your quadrant's going to look like. And no matter which direction you put it in, whether it's the top right, top left, whatever, it's going to work. You just need to make sure that you have 4 of these. So we're going to set this up here for reference so that I don't get messed up. And then we're going to sew this 3 more times. I'm going to get my unit for the upper left, my unit for the upper right, lay them right sides together and sew. Jason and Zoe are upstairs playing around. I can hear them laughing. This is the memory. These are the memories that I'm going to enjoy having from all of this COVID stuff. In fact, I'm feeling a little jealous. I want to go upstairs and play with them too. We'll get this block together and then I'll go hang out with my family. And I'm going to press this seam over to the right with my finger, this one over to the left, and then I'm just going to lay them on top of one another, nest my seams, and sew them. And again, I'm going to pay attention to that X that I see in the triangle. There we go. Want to go straight through the X, not above it, not below it, right through the middle. And right off. Going to finger press this up. And it looks just like the other one, so we'll set it there in that pile. Now let's sew 2 more. Again, we're going to orient our fabric just like our example up here. Just like that. Right sides together. And sew. This is why I'm happy to have the example, because I almost sewed it like that. And then this way, like that. And sew. Cut my thread. And we're going to press the bottom towards the left, the top towards the right. And by doing that, it's actually helping me from pressing any of my seams to the background, which for me is white, so I kind of like that. Now we're going to sew this at 1/4 inch. Right through the X, not above it, not below it. Take the time to line these fabrics up and sew all the way off. Cut my thread. I'm going to press this up. And we have 1 more to do. This goes this way, this goes this way, and I'm just going to go ahead and do it like this. Press to the left. Now, once these are all sewn together, you should actually find that these should measure at 6.5 inches a piece. You should have 4 blocks that measure at 6.5 inches. Just taking the time to line my fabric back up. It got a little wonky. Right through the X. Line up the other side of the seam. And sew. Then we're going to press this one up. Now I'm going to take a minute and actually iron all of these nice and flat. Take a look at the difference between this block that was pressed with some steam and this one that is just pressed with a little bit of heat. This one's standing up so much more, and this one's really nice and flat like a sheet of paper. This is what we want them to be like. So we're just gonna spritz them with some water. And we're gonna focus on the middle part of the block first. Then we'll pick it up and move it away from the center of the block. All right, now I'm going to take these over, measure them to make sure that they're at 6.5 inches and trim them down if I need to. And then we're going to sew them together into our final quilt block. Okay, here's the beauty of this. We're going to set this so that each of these has one of these dark triangles going in the corner on the outside perimeter. So you can kind of see this is what your star block is going to look like. These are all 4 quadrants that you just sewed together. And the only thing that you really need to pay attention to, there's 2 things that you can look at to keep your eye from getting messed up. First, you want to make sure that the center here is a pinwheel. So it should alternate your colors all the way around, and there should be no background in the middle. If you did that, you're probably okay. The other thing that you want to look for is in the corner of each of those quadrants, you have that accent piece with a piece of background. Your final product should show you a star with kind of like these ribbons or dashes going out in the corners. So now that we have these laid out together, I'm just going to put them together and sew it just like a 4-patch. I'm going to take a seam here, and then I'll sew those 2 rows together. If I wanted to, I could take the time to press these seams open, but I'm going to just do it to either side There's already a lot of bulk in other areas of this, so I'll just deal with it. It'll be okay. All right. We're going to hold each of our seams where we're nesting or overlapping. We're going to hold those seams together so that we're getting all of our points as matched up as much as we can. And there is our final block. We're going to need to give it a good steam press so that the middle will lay nice and flat, but that is what your finished block should look like. That's it. We have our block finished. I can't wait to see what yours looks like. Please post a picture over in the Becca's Babes Facebook group, or you can share it on Instagram with the hashtag Sew Becca Sampler. That's it for this video. I will see you guys all in the next one.